and then collapsing and cascading into a void that was created. That's how I pictured it in my head, you know? So it's just like all this energy that was perfectly still. It's fine, and it's all perfectly fit together like these little tiny bits, but not moving and nothing. And then all of a sudden, once the pressure started and the matter created, well, it all just fell to the matter in dispersion, void, and then just all these bits falling in. That's how I pictured it in my head, at least. But the question was, what's the perfect bit that fits together in that grid that could be locked solid until it's not? And that's the answer, you know, because it's fractal. It could be as infinitely small, but yet all still part of the same, you know, collapsing in.
Large as well.
I was thinking about that on one idea. You're aware of like the Star of David, right? It's made of two triangles.
Yep.
So like the Cantor's dust, the triangle gets the middle third removed, but instead of being empty, they put in a motif of another triangle. And then the motif would spread smaller and smaller until you have this infinite snowflake.
Yep.
If you take that actual infinite perimeter and were to tilt it on its side, you would notice that it is not a solid line. It is actually made up of two Cantor's dusts. So all those points in powers of two are spread out to make what appears to be a power of three. So it's actually individual little points like electrons spread out over an infinite surface. So it's made of two charges. The two triangles that make up the Star of David. It actually grows. The math says that that star isn't a solid object. It's made up of two rotating fields that are Cantor's dusts. They interlock to appear to be the snowflake.
Wow. The Merkaba.
Hello, Nathan.
Yep.
Hello.
Lulu.
Hello, Lulu.
Hello.
How are you guys? Great stuff. Great stuff. You know, like we're talking about elementary particles. There's 17 of them. Wouldn't that translate to 17 primary or elementary frequencies that combine into bigger things and then combine into bigger things till we reach something called an atom-sized frequency? Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's what they say.
Well, I mean, they're building blocks of an atom consist of 17 possible configurations.
If you look at Sheila's work with the coherent waveforms, you know, she gets those coherent waveforms, the standing waves, only when she combines, you know, those frequencies in the set.
Yeah.
It's chronic reinforcement.
I personally think it's fields, not particles.
Just a theory on the particles, because it was something that I actually heard you talking about that the other day with Mike Does about the fundamental particles. You know, I mean, look, it's just a theory, but if I'm under the summation, in my belief at least, right, that everything is effectively result of a wave at one point or another. So if you think about wave interference, okay, and you have you know, constructive wave interference that takes off the top little portion, okay, of a wave. Okay, that's going to be an electron. That's an electron, right? Now, every other fundamental particle is a different result of wave interference. That's just my theory of it. Now, as it falls down the system and these accumulations occur, then yeah, you have the condensation of this energy into greater and greater amounts that ultimately create mass in the end. But, you know, I mean, it's a long way to fall. You know, they have to go through different cycles of accumulation and density in order for this to happen. But that's my opinion of how fundamental particles are differentiated. And it's also just, again, an opinion. I'm a total dope. Literally says I'm an idiot.
Well, I mean, Warren York, for example, Warren York had this theory that the electron was made of 918 photons, which is a really it's a really interesting concept when you break it down, because the idea that you take 918 photons and he gives out the wavelength and the basic energy density of those photons that equal the total mass energy density of the electron. And How he got to that number, I mean, to be honest, going through Warren's work, it's way out there. He refers heavily on Dirac and other well-known physicists whose work, in my opinion, is pretty solidly founded and is now foundational in terms of the rest of physics. But the idea that matter is made of light wrapped up on itself, I don't think is that far of a cry short of what we're actually looking at, because when we really, when we really zoom in, what we tend to see is that matter acts like light, and that light seems to be more fundamental than matter itself. So if we consider that, we have to have also this other thing. Okay, so we can't just have light on its own. There can't just be a universe made purely of light. There has to be this other background field. That field by Tesla's word was called the aether, now referred to as the ether. And it's got a lot of different interpretations, but the luminiferous aether is specifically one made of electromagnetic waves, both electric scalar fields and magnetic field vectors. And so magnetic fields are torsional in the fact that they are curled. They are all closed loops on each other. And electric fields, being scalar, can be configured into any various gradients, being 360 or omnidirectional, or they can be focused into a fine beam, like in the example of the scalar beam from Eugene Podkanoff. And that was a gravitational device that used an electron impulse from a superconducting dual-layered disk through a magnetic field onto a target plate. And the end result was that when the electrons that had accelerated through the electric field inside this device and also spiraled into cyclotron motion through the external magnetic field that was applied to their trajectory, when they finally hit the target plate, they dissipated all of their momentum, and the target plate itself was restricted from motion, so the momentum carried through as a wave that now has been coined by Boeing under their patent called matter wave generator as a momentum, or as a matter wave, which is basically the same as the momentum wave that we look at from people like Henry William Wallace, for example, who look at the variations in momentum and energy coupling between two rotating masses with odd nucleon spin densities. He used brass. He also used a variety of other materials. Thomas Townsend Brown loved to use tantalum and any odd nucleon isotope of your normal matter. Basically, anything that has an odd balance of neutrons versus protons will experience a difference in gravitational inertia versus inertial acceleration. So that means things don't fall at the same rate. It's a violation breaker. It means that Einstein's basic energy equivalence principles don't apply in these situations.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
If I understand you right, then, is there any evidence then of time dilation with the gravity acceleration helping it?
We haven't been able to measure it, and I believe it's because the time dilation is happening interatomically. It's due to the refractive index being modified in the space where you don't have a correct number of neutrons to balance out the physical mass energy density of what we considered in all of our experiments for how fast something accelerates under a gravitational field. So let's say we take some normal matter, a non-isotope, meaning that it has a balanced number of neutrons and protons. We drop that in a gravitational field, we measure how fast it goes. 9.8 meters per second, right? So it's a pretty, basic measurement that the common materials have. But if we take something else that has an odd nuclear ratio, and we drop it in that same gravitational field, as in we drop something with an odd nuclear ratio, let's say we take tantalum, we separate it out into its isotopic parts and its non-isotopic parts, and we measure them on a basic scale, a high precision scale, and we measure them out to be 10.0000 grams each. So the two samples are identical in terms of their gravitational weight when they are not accelerating. But now we both drop them in a gravitational field. The isotope will rise up in an enclosed box compared to the non-isotope, which will fall at the same rate as the steel box. The reason for why is that the electric field has an effect on the localized region of space-time surrounding it because it is not balanced out by the correct amount of mass from the neutron. And so you end up with, in this case, what Brown calls an inertial isotope. Is it inertial isotope or gravity? Yeah, I believe it's the inertial isotope side. But it falls slower. And it has more inertia under acceleration. So it tends to rise up inside the enclosed box. As the entire box is dropping from top to bottom, you'll have these two elements, and they should drop at the same distance. They should fall down evenly, but one of these is actually going to drop a little faster than the other one. And you'll see that on camera. So there's been tests to show that there's purity violation and equilibrium violation using different elements that have different isotope ratios. It's just one of those things that's not currently looked at. Aluminum also has a very high degree of isotopic elements, and bismuth is almost 100%. So there's a reason why you hear about bismuth used in flying saucers and that kind of stuff for this technology.
Interesting.
Good info.
Very interesting.
That can be made into an alloy then, right? And would the property carry over to the, oh, dude, thank you.
Yeah.
So the physics.
I want to meet you someday. I want to talk with you.
I can get you my info. I'll drop it in the private chat.
Or hit
So Jeremiah, the physics of the particle inside the box is follows the relativity theory of the physics, of the local box. So it has to abide by the physics.
In this case, the experiment I'm referring to, it didn't use a particle inside of a box. It used a physical block of material, a physical block of metal. In fact, it used, I think it was 7 different samples, if I remember correctly, that were all placed on the bottom of the box. The box was dropped from the inside of some very tall tower. I think it was like an old nuclear power stack or something along those lines, but something reasonably tall. So the box was dropped. And there was a camera inside that recorded the entire drop test, and the box is enclosed, so there's no airflow around, what's going on inside. And these various elements, some of them.
What if it's the airflow?
Well, what I mean is there's no airflow inside the box because the box itself is completely enclosed, and so there's light inside the box because there's a clear plexiglass window, so light is getting in, and there's a camera inside the box. And the camera records that these elements don't all fall at the same rate. So these 7 different elements, most of them stay down, but some of them during the course of the test, they start to actually rise up, and some of them stay at the floor level. So it's really interesting to consider that, maybe this basic very old test where something was dropped off the Tower of Pisa, a feather and a bowling ball are a very nice analogy when we try to consider that everything falls at the same rate under a gravitational field because those are mixed elements. But when we take very pure elements that have high isotope ratios, they don't fall at the same rate. And it was something that's not looked at in physics today and something that needs to be looked at because this is how the craft that, say, visitors from other places would try to isolate their isotopes and utilize their unique properties in producing gravitational acceleration that's unusual for us humans.
So my question about this experiment would be that those 7 elements that were in the box, did they all have the same decay rate?
No, none of them had the same decay rate because they're all different elements. They all have different decay rates.
And they all fell at different times, correct?
Some of them stayed on the floor of the box, and some of them rose up inside the box. My guess would be that the ones that stayed on the floor of the box may have been actually falling faster than the box itself. But we wouldn't know it because they had no room to move down. They were already at the base, so they couldn't move down.
My question relates to time. That's the only reason why I asked.
Like the box drop test, the element should have started in the center of the box. There should have been something that just basically tilted down and left its way so they could have fallen. The ones that were heavier then, or they fell faster in a gravitational field, they should have been allowed to move down, but they were already at the bottom of the box. We couldn't see that in the experimental video clip. And the ones that were falling slower than the rest of the enclosure, they moved up inside the enclosure until it finally hit the ground.
Now, was that related to the weight of each element, or was that related? And this is where my mind goes.
It wasn't directly correlated to the mass. It wasn't directly correlated to the mass. So no, not the heavier mass elements didn't necessarily fall faster or slower. It was based on their nuclear spin ratio, their natural abundance.
And that's what gives me another question that I don't think can be answered. But my thought process is, because there were different elements and they're at different decay rates as they're falling, because of the I wiped it out, darn it. Because they're falling at like a different potential, in the sense where they have different potential in time, because they are different elements decaying at different time rates. That's why they came down at different levels while they were falling. It's just a thought.
No, basically what you're saying is, yeah, if they're decaying, then they have a dispersion, or, you know, there's basically a damping factor. So Todd Desiato he's working on a new theory, and I really like where he's going with it. And you'll hate that he's using the assistance of GPT, although rewriting everything that it says in his own words, because of course I know how you feel about GPT.
Yeah, I think if you have to use AI, you're not smart enough to be doing the work.
Well, he's not. He
Sorry.
I know. That's why I say, yeah, I know how you feel about it, but
sorry.
He doesn't have to use it. He's using it to clean up the wording.
That's what they all say.
And so the wording is actually rather important. Yeah, regardless, this idea that there's this damping factor, and if you take a gradient of energy that's very focused, and you turn that gradient of energy into a dispersed field, you end up with two very different forces in terms of your field vectors. So your gradient of energy has a trajectory. It's moving from one direction to the other. When it splits apart, that gradient that was pointing straight upwards now points in all kinds of different directions. So which is your net vector for the body that contains this gradient of energy density? Well, obviously it's in the direction that the gradient was moving, because you dispersed it. And through that whole damping factor, the dispersion, that you put in energy in one single field vector, and this is important to you, old man builds, you put in energy in one field vector by using electrostatic fields to polarize the center plate, creating a net polarization along the nuclear magnetic moment through the electric field, with the top plate being positive and the bottom plate being negative. Now you've excited the center plate using AC, and you've disrupted the field gradients because you're effectively modifying the field connection lines between the top plate and the bottom plate based on the potential on the center plate. When you disrupt that, you're taking the gravitational field, which is already trying to polarize every single molecule inside the center plate and every single atom inside the center plate. They're trying to pull along that certain gravitational field vector, which means that what you would normally have as a symmetrical recession is now being squeezed, and it's actually slightly wider. Instead of being more upwards, it's now wider because it's squeezed into the gravitational field.
Victor's cones.
Right. When you disrupt that field, that can widen back out again, and you can dissipate the energy through the damping factor of the stress energy from the electric fields that are being superimposed thanks to your inputs. But something else has to happen. You have to have a strong enough magnetic flux in order to disrupt the field gradients inside the center plate. And that magnetic flux comes from the bottom magnets. So
yeah, you get them too strong, though, it ruins it. It ruins it. You can't get them too strong.
So it allows it to go from stored energy into dispersed energy. And in that very moment, that's when you can actually get your lift, because now you're taking all this stored energy that was tilted up in one single field vector into the gravitational field, and you're basically allowing it to twist and disperse off sideways. And if you look at, geez, I'm trying to remember that guy's name. He's got this diagram of combination from the top and bottom and annihilation off the sides, or dispersion. But doesn't matter.
Evidence that those different speed rates could somehow be giving a lower state of entropy that could therefore be tapped by the higher state of entropy that we're causing? because the lower entropy state would give us.
He's got it.
That's how my system works. It's actually in my theory, written into my book. Entropy is, I want entropy. I want to use the fact that as the energy is starting to degrade, I'm capturing that flow and I'm reversing.
I had a question, Jeremiah. I think you probably are one of the few people that could answer this. What did, like, do you know the double slit experiment? The one that, you know, they shoot a proton. Okay. All right. What is the distance between the slit and the detector for you to either for sure see two or see an interference, start to see an interference pattern? What is that distance?
The answer to your question is it depends on the wavelength of the input, and you can use things up to micrometers for electrons. Okay. If you preferably want nanometer slits. Technically, if you widen out your beam, if you have a lens that spreads it out, you can still get the interference pattern if you take a look over time. Even with slits that are far too spaced apart for the wavelength. The key is that the slits need to be very, very narrow. So if they're wide slits, you won't get any effect. They have to be extremely narrow, and they should be just about the size or smaller than that wavelength that's going through them. And for physical particles like buckyballs or electrons that also show wave interference, they should be pretty close to the size of those particles. Otherwise, if they're too large, you end up not getting the interference pattern. See, there's actually a wave interaction with the wall itself of the slit. And it's
okay, but the distance, does that distance matter where the detector is from where that's like, you know, to either see the interference pattern or not? If it's close, you won't. If it's further,
so you
probably would.
You have interference fringes, and you know, if you look at them at an angle, they cross. So you may have a fringe here and another one up here, and you know, one here. So they'll spread out. The farther you get away, the more fringes and interference patterns that you get. So the closer that you are, the more refined and the stronger the individual fringe patterns will be. So if you get at one range, you're basically going to have just two. Let's say you put your impact plate right up against the slits. Well, you're going to have two lines, right? Because there's no space for the waves to interfere. If you move it, you know, out one wavelength, you're going to start to see a slight differential. You're going to see a fringe in the center, and you're going to start to see the appearance of two fringes on the side. You move it out a couple more wavelengths, and you're going to start to see multiple fringes that are showing up along there. So the distance and the resolution, the number of fringes, depends on the wavelength and the actual distance between the slits. But obviously, if you put your plate right up against it, you know what you're going to get. You're collapsing the wave function beforehand.
No, I get it. No, okay. I don't know, for whatever reason, I completely misunderstood that. But the lighter ones would be the back ones, the ones that already hit this, like, you know, and are interfering back. The ones that are like solid ones would be the first phase ones.
Right? That's great. That's where you're getting your first wave coherence pattern.
Okay.
And that's where they're all basically impacting the plate at the same time, and their wave function collapses when they hit the target plate. So that's where you're actually seeing that light finally being recorded. Where your particles are hitting, you know.
Because I looked everywhere online to find an equation for how to calculate that distance, and nothing. I've tried every form of search, you know.
No, it's funny because they don't bother to include that stuff in the papers, and the reason for why is assume that you know, if you're already doing a double slit experiment, that you also understand that the wavelength and the slot depth and width, you understand that those are the parameters which set your distance. So it's just assume that you already know that, therefore it's not included. It's sort of like the assumption, you know, if you're reading a manual on how to do, you know, a wide path stick weld, that your welder is plugged in. They don't necessarily tell you that you need to plug it in, but it's like it's one of those things like, well, we assume that you know this, so we didn't include it in the instructions and we didn't include it in the paper. We just assume that you know it.
Yeah, but it's a viable measurement that, you should have that, could have its variables on this side and variables on that side. So,
right, no, but it's funny because what you've really pointed out here is the severe disconnect between the academic thought process of people that operate within the educational system and the rational thinkers who operate by a process of elimination and use deductive reasoning, right? Because you can't use deductive reasoning in the academic community. It doesn't
No,
work.
there isn't any.
No, there's no deductive reasoning. You can't get down to the bottom of it because it's based on whose shoulders you're standing on and whose shoulders they were standing on and whose shoulders they were standing on, and you go all the way down the chain. And it's basically a big centipede. If you know the reference,
nothing done because they're too busy writing. You can't get nothing done because they're too busy writing papers about each other.
Right, exactly. So
peer review, right?
We get the experimentalists, and the experimentalists, like those of us here today, are the ones who really push these theories. And occasionally, somebody will get on and they'll be really overly confident in the fact that they got grants because they filled out the right paperwork and they did the right maths, and they're like, you guys don't know anything and you're a bunch of idiots, and you don't know how to review this, right?
Meanwhile, they're watching us for pointers and tips.
Exactly. And then I see stuff that I put out there show up in papers 2 months later, and it's just one of those things like, well, this has happened 10 times before, big deal. It's like what Tesla said. When Tesla was interviewed by a newspaper writer about what he thought of the fact that Marconi was being accused of using his patents, he said, "Go ahead, let him steal those patents. I'm way ahead already." Paraphrasing here, so like he already knew.
Yep.
Everything everyone knows is just a dream someone had at one point in time, and the more accepted it is, the more mainstream it becomes. Like, think about how many times science has changed over the years, and it's all been stuff that somebody's already thought of that actually precedes that. It's just sort of how it goes. That's the evolution of this process, and I think that's where it gets really broken with the academic system at this point, though, is like, it seems at this stage, like it used to be like, the church said you can't look at these certain things. There was spirit world and then there was matter world, and it's got, the church is the spirit world and science is the matter world, and you stay on your side of the line. And then, there was a little bit of time where it started loosening up, where things actually started to progress. And as that progression was made, look at how fast things accelerated. It brings you right through the Industrial Revolution. It brings, discoveries in Egypt. And now all of a sudden, in, same time as the Industrial Revolution, people are rediscovering all that stuff. At that same exact time, Tesla is, figuring out, all the principles that he figured out that we now use, but then it all got swept under the rug. Defund him, make new rules. Einstein's out. Now all of a sudden you're stuck in the box of relativity, and then he brings in quantum mechanics into the fold, but they don't really accept it widely at that stage. And then they start realizing that there's so many flaws with relativity as it is, with unanswered questions, that they have to start filling the gaps. And you want to know something that's totally, and pardon my French, it's already been used once, and I'll be the second one to say, what's fucked up about them in academia is it's absolutely positively okay for them to say, mathematically this exists, but we have never identified it. We don't know what it does, but we're going to give it a name and a function, and therefore it exists, therefore it's something. But
that's how I feel about particle theory.
But if you mention something that is objectively true, that you could show, like, well, where does this come from? Look at this effect, and be like, and here it is, and I'm going to give it a name. They're like, but that doesn't fit into the laws that we drew, so therefore it doesn't exist. We won't review your paper. We won't look at your experiment. And chances are, if you make a big stink about it, we'll shut you up. So,
you know what? Academia failed when they brought funding in. When you have to apply for funding,
always,
academia failed. It's all about the search for truth and the search for new inventions and new ways of looking at life. Not getting paid to write a paper. Give me a break. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's pathetic.
I mean, I'd like to believe that there's a lot of very, very, very sharp, knowledgeable academics, okay, who have questioned themselves and everything that they know this stuff, but have to shut up because at the end of the day, it's feeding their pocket.
They know it, but they're not going to step out of line.
But that's the thing, though. Grow a set of gray-haired balls and step out of line and get the shit done. Otherwise, you're just towing the line like every other dog.
Yeah, but haven't you noticed there's a lot of them out there that drank the Kool-Aid, dude. Like, a lot of them actually believe this stuff.
Have you not noticed that most of them will, at the end of when they're about to retire, expose a lot of, hidden science? Like during their working, years, they're not, because they're banking on that, paycheck, but they know the truth. And and so at the end, when they're right about to retire or after they retire, they, divulge all this like scientific information. And it's like, well, why didn't you say so when you were in that position before? I've seen that more often than not, honestly.
I don't think that academia has the credibility that it used to. Once upon a time it did, but MIT's gotten caught lying, so has Harvard, so has Stanford. So it's like, where do you go when you're looking for the truth? Well, the only way you can find the truth is through experimentation and talking amongst people to try and bang out the truth, to figure out what's really going on.
Okay, so
you're going to rely on some guy who's writing papers.
To back it up, Gerald, funny story. A buddy of mine, whose name I won't mention, who built the first self-propelled ion aircraft that was vertical lift, which you can probably figure out who I'm talking about based on that information, had built it many years before MIT's ion-powered plane. After MIT was credited in multiple news media outlets as being the first to build a self-propelled ion-powered aircraft, he submitted the fact that not only had he already done this, but he had patents that were approved and a fully fledged company that was working on solving this problem.
Yep.
They got back to him, said that they would forward it to the right people, and then he never heard anything back. So, he messaged again, never heard anything back, messaged another time, and they told him that they were not interested in speaking with him finally on the third time. And that was where it lay to rest.
But he holds the patent.
But he holds the patent, and the patent is dated many years before MIT's big release of their ion-powered plane.
See, academia is supposed to be about creative ideas. It's supposed to be about forwarding consciousness of men, not sucking in all that greed and getting your name on a paper and classifying yourself as a so-called whatever.
Right, well, here's the worst part. The worst part isn't even for us as experimenters. It actually falls on the students, because what will happen is a professor will put forward a thought experiment, a project, and offer credits for it to the students. They'll work on it. They'll experiment with it. They'll spend their free time, their extra hours, in the laboratories working on this thing. They'll develop a technology and make it viable according to the parameters that were laid out by the professor. And then the professor's name will go on the paper. The students won't be mentioned. And the rest of their lives, they'll have no trust for any kind of authoritative community, because it was stolen from them. And this creates a whole revenge plot of, I'm going to become a professor and I'll do it too, or I'm just completely out of the system, so I can't operate within the setup that was laid out for this kind of productivity. And it really creates a huge divide. The fact that the professor has to steal content from his students because he can't come up with something on his own that meets that same level of intellectual prowess and genius.
Not for anything, but this is where the thing really goes full spectrum into the deep, dark psychology aspect of how just the egos of all this stuff. It really is the destroying factor of it all. Like, I mean, it really is. When you worry about yourself and those close to you, and you care enough for others, like, you end up being poor in some ways and rich in many others. You know, but like tell that to people because like, you know, right, they spent their whole damn life studying something, trying to crack some kind of code, and they do it and now they have nothing to do with it. And I can understand how that's bittering to some people. But like, you know, what you do with that is, you know, that is the alchemy of the self, you know?
But now if you've come up with something or you've cracked a code and you go to put it out there, 9 times out of 10, academia gets nervous, gets their hands on it, takes it for themselves and slaps a name on it. Or they hide it for a while and bring it out later. Like the thunderstorm generator, for instance. Malcolm did an amazing job, but it's Paul Pantone's work that he's working with. So when Paul Pantone went to jail, all his tech disappeared. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, after everybody's forgotten his name, Malcolm Bendall comes out with the thunderstorm generator and barely mentions his name.
Right. Well, there's a reason for that, too. There's a reason for that. Okay.
No, I know it was explained. You don't want to bring everything out at once.
He's also came out with the plasma unification model and the turbine-less, or the vortex turbine.
He also had to rebrand it to not serve the same fate too, and you know, like there's a little bit of an association issue with it. That's that's my pull on it. Is it's like
that's exactly it, right?
That to me last time.
It's an association issue, and so if I were to create some kind of cold fusion system, and I were to mention that it's based on the works of Pons and Fleischmann.
Yeah, you automatically. I get that.
Yeah, automatically, right? If I were to create a water splitter, and I were to say it's based on Meyer's work, automatically.
Yep.
So I won't mention those kinds of names if I'm working on that tech, even if it's basically a copy of it. And the reason for why is these people were, you know, we've seen what happened to them. We've seen how systems have destroyed them, and in Stan's case, literally murdered him. As far as, you know, we speculate, I know that's conspiracy. You know,
he had big
side, but right.
He had big cojones. That's the thing. These guys came out and stood up. They had cojones. They said it how it was. Right?
I was trying to like tell Ben a little bit about this the other day, but it was in the chat, and I really couldn't get through like my message in the chat like that. You know, what I was saying is, you know, he had said that he had went, you know, outside, you know, he is outside the box like the rest of us, right? But he went inside the box just to get a little bit of feedback, but presented it in a way that he would, and rightfully so, like he would to any of us. But then it's like, well, then you got to know, right? You got to know like where you're, you know, what you're going to get when you're sharing it in certain things. It's okay to want like the information or the opinion from inside the box, but if you're going to go in there, you're going to have to present it in such a way that is ambiguous, and you're not going to want to make claims. You know, you're just going to simply want to say, hey, listen, this is the setup, this is how it is, this is what I'm seeing. Thoughts?
It's all a basic principle, though. It's all the same thing. I get what you're saying. Maybe it just irritates me.
Well, it is. No, you are right, because it is irritating, and rightfully so.
Yeah,
but if you want to go and get information from people that might have it inside the box, that's what you have to do, or else you know you have to expect what's coming down the pipe. That's
right. Basically, all you're saying is you got to meet them where they're at.
You got to meet them where they're at, and you don't make a claim. That's the point. You know, you don't say, hey, look, I'm pulling XYZ out of here, so therefore I have this. You have to say, hey, listen, this is my setup. I'm testing this, that, the next thing. These are my results. Thoughts?
Oh, I get that.
Also, the thing with Malcolm you have to remember is he's from the oil industry, so he knows how they operate.
Yeah.
Guys, we're getting reverb somewhere. Somebody's got something on.
I turned down my volume.
And let's see if that takes it away.
Oh, we're good now.
Maybe that's the other part that bothers me. He's from the oil industry, and I've already had a run-in with a member of the oil industry trying to buy my work. I told him to go pound sand. But, I mean, I don't know.
I have a question.
He was an oil prospector. Yeah, he would basically use his geochemistry background to go and find oil for different companies.
What's your question?
The guy I discussed with was the brother of the owner of Shell.
Yeah. Okay. So Lulu has a question.
I was thinking what you said, like these students, do the work and then the professors take credit. But aren't computer systems nowadays, like they have AI in them to the point where they can pinpoint, when that word or that, wherever that the student was working on that project, and it timestamps it. So even if the paper later gets published at a different date, but it could go back and, where did that ever exist in, what computer or what IP address or this, and it could tag it back to its original creator, regardless
that
of,
would be nice. And I understand what you're saying. Okay, you're thinking about the legal system. The legal system actually does tie order of events to reciprocation of, justice. In this case,
right?
It's a private institution. They're not a legal system. They don't have to go in order of events, and there is no justice. They operate on their own system, and if they say that something that happened after the fact, if effect happened after cause, effect is perfectly fine to be the only thing to consider. So they don't have to operate under the same rules and regulations as a proper legal system. And so there is no reciprocation for a student, even if that student can prove directly to the dean that the paper that they wrote and submitted was done before the professor submitted theirs and got full credit for it. There is no reciprocation. The student doesn't have the credentials. The student doesn't have the tenure. They don't have the ability to submit to the big scientific papers, and there is nothing that they can do about it. So
okay, all right, but now listen to this. What if we launch an AI that doesn't see, like universities as hierarchy, but sees the data? What data has hierarchy?
You're
you understand?
That the professor is going to actually implement putting that data in.
Right.
No.
Like an honor system where there is actually some sense of honor and some sense of accountability or integrity here, but those things don't exist in this system.
No, there's no honor in academia.
Not to mention, any student taking that posture against their university and their professor is socially damning themselves in the industry that they're studying to be in. Like, socially, it just doesn't work either. Even if you have a timestamp and the proof and the this, the that, you're destroying yourself before you even have a foot out the door, and nobody's looking to do that.
Okay, let's just say again, it's not an accountability. It's not like a judgment system. It's not a law system. I'm just saying in natural numbers, if we were to extract all the data from all the devices and chronologically put them in the order that they were created, wouldn't that create a lot of discrepancies in the data that we take as, this was before this person came? But if we, not have the bias of law and, the professor and student, just raw data and, put it on the timeline.
Yeah,
wouldn't that then?
Right, but
that could be manipulated depending on how you run that data, what data sets. If you're talking about running large language models and so on, you could get raw data, but who's looking at it? And if you're asking the AI to be the one to be the analytics of it by input of the large language model, it could be manipulated. So I mean, I'm going to tell you as a matter of fact, I could go into the best publicly available AI that there is, and I could get it to tell me whatever it wants to by manipulating it. I've done it 1,000 times. I'll continue to do it, and it's fun. But I'm not saying that there couldn't be an AI that exists that is beyond this, but I think that the nature of an AI, if it were to achieve the ability of a human's analytical skills, even at the highest levels, even the highest level individuals can be manipulated. So you're never going to have, the nefarious acts of people being the ones that are ultimately being the ones requesting the data and gathering it are ultimately going to be the end result of the analytics system. And it comes down to who's the one doing it and what's their credibility versus anybody else's. the whole thing is you throw your hands up in the air and that's it. I mean, I literally you could convince like a GPT to tell you anything you really want to validate your results.
Ultimately, academia needs to be like the system of academia needs to be destroyed and rebuilt from the ground up. I don't mean destroyed in a bad way, but I mean like absolutely changed. The professors have too much power in the sense of what they define can be researched. They tell people how to think. They tell them where to look. They tell them how to look. That's not school. That's not learning. That's indoctrination. That's military, for Pete's sakes. You know what I mean? I don't know. I could be wrong. And hey, I apologize to those if I'm insulting anyone. I don't believe that the people in academia are wrong. I believe that the system is broken.
Yeah, it's peace. It's all peace and love. It's not computers or the analytics or anything in your situation that's the problem. It's the people. The people are the problem. And you know, if it's the people that request this change, well, who then, and what does it mean to who? Because that's the exact same situation that we're saying with AI, without AI. This one looking at it, that one looking at it. It's all the same.
And academia is a really nice foundation. You know, you start out, if you stay within basically the parameters of what you're being taught, you're gonna learn the baseline, and you'll be able to do what we've already known for well over 100 years. So get that under your belt and understand that every single parameter that you've been taught within all those things that you were told were constants, they're all variables, and now you start your real journey. So
yeah, academia is about towing the line. It's not about learning much.
I don't know, because I'm going back
past that point.
I'm going back to school for science information technology, but I have to write what is the purpose. I'm trying to figure out, you know, different thought ideas. What would be the purpose of why do I want to go back into this field? You know, what would be something, so I'm going along those lines. It's to capture true history of accounts rather than the made up ones.
I was going to say, if you want a golden star in your paper, just say you want to learn how much of a genius Albert Einstein is.
No, I want to do something that is completely different. You know, I appreciate all the inventors and all the scientists but you know, at one point I would like to do something that is accredited to me, not just to, you know, the olden times.
Well, here's the thing about entrance like that is the perception of the person reading it. You know, if they know the curriculum is XYZ, okay, really for their institution, they want the person that's going to follow the XYZ. Now, what you go and you do with that information after you're out of there is totally up to you entirely. But if you walk in there and you start saying that you think the wheel is broken and you want to get the information in order to fix the wheel, all they hear is friction and somebody who's not going to peg well into their little hole. You know, that's sort of it. You know, being devil's advocate because you're curious in classroom settings and so on. You know, like that's counterproductive to their educational process. You know, and frankly, between me and you, like, it's not, and even if you're 1,000% right, if you were in that situation, they're going to make you feel like a fool publicly in front of everybody the moment you start bringing that up. Because again, school is not about, you know, breaking the mold. That's what you do after you get the information and the credentials. You know, school is about passing tests.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, so
by the way, Gerald,
Ian's looking for you. Educational goals, they're, you know, if you separate them in your head and keep them in perspective, then, you know, I think it's going to be great for you, you know?
Yeah. But, you know, like at the end, like your essay has to be something original. There's got to be something unique, you know, for like this field is a systems field at the end of the day, and it gets to have, you know, anybody educated in that kind of field would have access to a lot more things than the average human being, and whether it's in research or information or even, assignment of things for people. So, you have to have a bigger goal than just to learn whatever is currently there. You have to also, put a
Sure,
plan
but
for,
remember, if you're
what are you going to do for the
Pollock and you're
future
in
of
art
this?
school, if you're Pollock and you're in art school and for your final exam, you take a whole bunch of paint and throw it on a canvas arbitrarily, and you're like, this is the next big thing. They're not going to see it that way until proven otherwise. So,
Are you kidding me? I've seen it in our gallery. That's
when
what it
it's
looks
super
like.
creative and off the chart of what you've learned, and there's no direct correlation, that's where you got to be careful. That's all I was saying, because if you're Andrew Pollock, fine art school, you could paint a beautiful painting, but if your final exam is this next big thing that's not realized yet, that's where it gets a little dicey.
Right.
All right. Good thing I stopped going to school a long time ago.
Amen. Never stop learning.
One thing
They
about
sent me home more times than I got to go there. They just pointed to the door and said, "Get out! Just you belong over there." Yeah.
Ethan was Spicoli.
I'm serious, man.
Oh, dude.
Oh. I think my senior year, man, I only spent like a couple hours at school. And then the rest of the time I just went home. There was no reason. I mean, if you could do algebra 2 and geometry and pass them on home studies and just go in and take the test whenever you want to, God, it doesn't really matter if I go to school or not. I already understand it. Okay, I'm way past you, man. All I got to do is go into English class, put in a bunch of high-fluting words, you know what I mean? Look through my thesaurus, and that's it. That's it. You got 5 sentences, and you construct it this way, and you can write an essay all day, and I don't really give a shit. Okay? I never have. Who cares about writing all that garbage? Okay? It's just dumb.
Well, everything's got its place.
But it's to suck
when
up
your
time.
gravel fire lifts off the ground, you're not going to write a paper?
No. I don't even know that I'll show it. To be very honest with you, I just don't know.
So they don't come and take it?
Well, that's exactly what they do. You got to understand, there's 2 Air Force bases right next to me. So they'll be in my house in like 5 minutes. It's
true.
Yep, pretty much. Can you send me a paper letter that it works?
Oh, I'll let you guys do it in private.
But now, Victor, I kind of wonder, okay, so let's say I get mine flying and then I write a paper. Who's going to listen? Like, who's going to read it? Academia is for writing papers is for your peers, right? Am I correct to assume that? Or
it would be us. Us to break that paradigm.
I get that part. I'm definitely writing something for you guys. I'm already like 98% done. I just have to finish.
It's all about the title. You've got to give it something that people are already searching for. I mean, if you give it something obscure, like you talk about Hoppions and, tiny little magnetic structures, probably not going to get too much public interest, probably not going to get the interest of a lot of people to review it. You talk about a new way to do something and just start it out with a new way to, and then follow it in with, a new way to approach gravity, a new way to consider energy extraction from the ZPF. That kind of thing, that type of title, it'll get attention. And so it comes down to the title.
Interesting. Okay.
So like capture words, like words that attract, yeah, okay.
And in this case, you're not talking to an algorithm. So this is not like, YouTube optimization or tuning the algorithm there. In this case, you're talking specifically to academics and scientists, mathematicians, theorists, and physicists who are looking at this stuff. And you're trying to you're trying to captivate their interest. And the one thing they all share in common is they want that new thing that puts them ahead of everyone else. And starting out with a new way too is that new thing that might put them ahead of everybody else. So they have to read it. They've got to, instinctively, intuitively read it, because
just to get that,
it might be that thing that gives them the advantage, right?
What a bunch of suckers.
Right?
So,
I know,
so
I'm
this
sorry.
could be
I'm just being
considered a
honest,
paper.
though.
Well, Gerald has Project Blue Book over there.
Oh, we got to go, Gerald.
This is the book that tells you how I built my coils, what they're based on, the geometry, the numbers, the math, the everything. So this could be considered a paper. But, I mean, it's like...
That's the first book they're going to take when they show up at your house.
Well, there's copies. Go ahead. You can have this one.
I do that too. I put all my stuff in at least 3 different forms so that I can. Yeah.
Yeah,
I got a question for Exotic. Could I ask you a question?
You can ask me whatever you want.
Icing spins, magnetic icing spins. Are you
Icing.
familiar with icing spins?
Are you
a
talking
magnetic
about
domain called an icing spin? ISING.
No, but let me take a look.
Or spin glass. What a spin glass is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm familiar with spin glass states, not icing spins as one of the particular states. I'm looking it up now, though.
I was just wondering if you had an easy way to understand what an icing spin model, or if it's the same thing you were talking about, spins on the molecules of different elements would be lower entropy.
Well, it's funny, that ties right into the rock and that whole discussion. I don't know if, you guys caught that, but.
Yep.
I mean, I can read it. So for people who are wondering what an Ising spin is, the Ising model, named after the physicist Ernest Ising and Wilhelm Lenz, is a mathematical model for ferromagnetism in a statistical mechanistics. The model consists of discrete variables that represent magnetic dipole moments of atomic spins that can be in one of 2 states. The spins are arranged in a graph, usually a lattice, allowing each spin to interact with its neighbor. And so, to put that into layman's English, what it means is if you have a spin state of one particular spin in some kind of atomic model, and you have another atom that's at some other angle, they'll tend to, instead of being at different angles, they'll tend to try to spin themselves together into a similar spin alignment, or if they're at a slightly off angle like this, they'll tend to spin themselves into a alignment like this.
Well, like a gyroscope almost.
Right. So they're going to try to align with themselves, is what this sounds like.
So
if I'm understanding what this is talking about correctly, and yeah, it does relate to that. If I'm understanding that correctly.
So is that Cooper pairs then for superconductivity, where they get both electrons to spin with the?
It's directly related.
Okay. I was trying to figure out. Thanks.
Yeah, it's directly related. So
it's directly related to spin liquids, is what it really is. It's the same concept.
Right. So let's say you have 2 conductors facing. Let's say you have 2 conductors facing like this, and my fingers point in the directions of the electron flow. So we're not using whole flow theory, we're using electron flow. So what's going to happen is electrons are flowing up through my hand to the point of my finger and in that direction, and then they're, moving continuously. My 2 fingers will push apart because the electron flow moving this way and the electron flow moving this way are in opposing directions. The spins of each electron flow with their orthogonal magnetic fields. As the electrons flow up this way, they follow the right-hand rule, and they'll consider to rotate. So the 2 spins are basically pushing against each other. We have these 2 concentric rotations that are trying to cross each other like this, and they push apart. If they were, sorry, other way around. So in this direction, it's kind of interesting. They'll push apart on the side, but if you move them over center, they're both rotating in the same direction. So you see how this hand is rotating like this, and this hand is rotating like this? If these two are aligned, one over the center of the other, and they're both rotating in the same direction, they'll actually pull together. But if they're on the sides of each other and they're rotating just like that, they'll push apart because they're moving in opposite directions versus the same direction. So if we have a bunch of spins, what's that?
Would that line up then be coherence, or is that where constructive and deconstructive interference comes in?
Right, you get constructive interference on the faces, and you get destructive interference from the sides. So in terms of your permanent magnetic field, you just have trillions of little atomic spins that are all aligned along the same axes. And so there is actually no magnetic field per se. You just have this net rotating electric field with trillions of tiny little electric fields that are all rotating along the same spin vector axes and pointing in that same direction. So if you go to the face of the magnetic field tends to kind of disappear because you've got spins that are counter-rotating at the face of the magnet. They're going in opposite directions from where your probe is at that very face. But if you go far enough away, all those net spins, they spread out. So they spread out, you know, in field lines that loop around.
And that's what brings the torus back.
Right. So the field lines technically don't exist. It's just a nice way to describe it. Field lines are just one way to use words to describe the basic shape and form of the magnetic flux structure. But either way, you have these fields that affect space-time, and they're affecting the refractive index in this particular geometry. And so for epsilon and mu, they're affected in the way that a field line is demonstrated. And yes, even iron filings do demonstrate those same geometries, regardless of the fact that a lot of people want to say, you know, you can't use iron filings because they're not a true depiction of field lines. True, technically, but they do follow that same geometry. So deal with it. You end up with this structure where you have your electric fields that are all spinning in the same direction, but no net magnetic field. So there is no magnetic field. At the end of the day, there is no magnetic field from a permanent magnet, from an electromagnet, none whatsoever. There's only this rotating electric field and the net combined motion of all the electric charges that are moving faster. So in this case, atoms, the electrons are moving much faster than the protons in terms of the amount of space that they displace in their orbitals because they weigh much less. So the protons and the electrons, even for a balanced atom that has the correct number of protons and electrons of equal number, will have the electrons moving much faster. And the fact that the electrons are moving much faster through space-time means they have a larger geometrically amplified relativistic field. And the fact that relativistic electric field exists gives them a geometry that allows what we call the formation of a magnetic field. The magnetic field at the very fine position is called the B field in physics. And when we get out to the larger frame and we look a fair distance away from our magnet, we see the combination of all those B fields, and we call the combination of the B fields an H field. And that's what we call the net magnetic field.
So magnets are just some kind of a little pump?
Yeah, magnets are just a rotating electric field source. That's it.
So I have a question about that. So I want to put this in context of the rock situation for a moment. Now, suppose you have a material that has those attributes that you just described. One piece of material. Okay. Now, let's say you cut that piece of material up into 20 different pieces. Okay. Now you start interacting these pieces of material together. What do you suppose?
Okay, I think you're asking the classic question of if you slice a long magnet. Let's say that this straw is a magnet, and this finger is north, and this finger is south, and we slice it in half, and now what happens? Now these two pieces, they don't want to necessarily stick together in the same formation, right? So you're asking about what happens when you actually divide up something that already has a spin orientation. Is that what you're questioning? Okay,
I guess I'll put it into context. I suppose you haven't seen the episode where I talked about the rock, have you?
I've actually never seen your show, to be honest. I
No?
don't
Okay.
know who you are. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I'm Joe. I'm on the channel every so often. I'm a little out of my mind, and I'm totally wrong about everything.
Well, that's okay. So am I. So
yeah,
you know, we're in the
club. So anyway, without going into the whole thing with it, okay, I had a mineral specimen that I collected. Okay, I have a hunch that I knew what it was. I was actually didn't know what it was at the time. I was going to make some jewelry for my girlfriend with it. I go and I start taking cores out of this thing. Okay, and I'm noticing immediately that this mineral ain't right. What I mean by that is, well, I mean, it's kind of throwing static charge. It's sort of wanting to fly out of my hand, sort of wanting to cramp my hand up. It's sort of wanting to not move on its own, but if you touch the thing, it had excited moments, you know? So I cut it into a bunch of pieces, trying to find the piece that I was going to make the jewelry out of, knowing that something strange was kind of going on with it. All right. And I put all the pieces together, and there was very unusual interactions between the pieces of the stone itself. Okay. It would lock, but then release. It would, then it would become like, very like it would bounce off of it like a piece of glass, give like a high ping sound sometimes, then other times it would lock, same pieces in contact with each other. Its poles, if it had them, would seemingly shift. If you rub two pieces of it together like flat surfaces like this, it would rotate, then it would stop, then it would lock. It was screwing with a piece of titanium in my wrist, like when I was handling it. Yeah. So I was like, what the hell am I dealing with? And I'm pretty familiar with rocks, minerals, and crystals and stuff, you know, like been collecting rocks and stuff my whole life. But I'm like, never seen anything like this ever in my entire life.
I'd love to give you an answer on that, but I can't.
So, well, here's what I can tell you, you know, based on the volume measurement of it. It seems to be Hubert Smithite, which I didn't know exactly what it was, but it looked like it. And the hardness test was the same. And the density test was it was similar enough that it led me to believe that it was probably that. I mean, it was in matrix. There was other stuff going on. It wasn't isolated. It was a natural specimen. So, you know, that was sort of what I came to the conclusion. And then, but I knew nothing about it. Then I start looking into it, and it turns out that they're growing this stuff in labs. In fact, MIT did like a huge, basically a lecture on it, and its particular crystal lattice structure, which was it's exactly like the six-pointed star. They're all just locked into each other. And they said that it's one of the few known quantum spin liquids, so it doesn't have a predeterministic spin of any of its electrons, and that it has moments of excitement that can shift the poles depending on at random. So it's like in a continuous state of like flux with itself. They call it like like a multiferroic. It's a multiferroic you know, spin liquid, but it's not liquid. It's solid, obviously. It's just the spin state that's liquid. Because
Never heard of it. I mean,
yeah,
I've never heard of a multiferroic liquid at all. That's a new term for me. So, thank you for the new term.
Yeah,
you look up.
Yeah, and it was. I'm telling you, as a matter of fact, it was very, very fascinating, and it had very, very fascinating anomalous effects. Very, very fascinating anomalous effects.
Sorry, I missed all that, guys. I had to go across the street because it was on fire and bang on the neighbor's door to get them out because the house that was close to them is too close and it's like in flames. And that's the fire department.
Oh my God.
Breath. Yeah, that's why I was out.
Are they okay? They get
Never
out?
know. Yeah, we're at the house and the fire department's putting out the fire now. It's just
How did you see it?
My wife went and yelled down to me and said, "You better look at this." And that's when I cut off the camera. I ran upstairs, and some guy was running away from the house with a blanket over his head.
Oh, jeez.
And the flame was lighting the front door of this abandoned house, was starting to light. So I grabbed my fire extinguisher. Unfortunately, the fire extinguisher's out because I remember using it for a grease fire. And so I couldn't put the fire out, and my wife was calling the fire department. Then I banged on the neighbor's door, got them out, and then the fire department just showed up. So I just came back.
Oh, that's an awful lot of excitement, man.
I live, man. I'm telling you, never a dull moment. It's Jeremiah. He's been alive with me when crazy stuff's gone on around here. So.
Yeah, no, if you want to look into that and kind of break it down in stupid terms for me. I mean, I follow you when you talk, but you know, it's like I already sat through that damn lecture, and like at the time I didn't really have the baseline of knowledge that I have now. You know, so like it took me a long time to get through and digest that. Like I had to like be looking up all sorts of different rabbit hole shit to get to the bottom of what they were even trying to say. But there's papers out there about it. It's called Hubert-Smithite, and it's a multi-ferroic spin liquid. So,
Hubert-Smith. Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's one word. Like it's like a guy's name, like Hubert Smithite, like a mineralite at the end.
I got that.
Hubert-Smithite.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and it might just solve a lot of. It might be like a solid state solution for a lot of problems.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's kind of how the transistor was discovered, wasn't it? Piece of some kind of metal material.
Yeah. I mean, I know the composition of it off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it's like it's a copper zinc shit. Now I forget. I know that it's a copper zinc ore. There's a few other things in it though. I think it might be a hydrochlorite.
Yeah, you're correct. It's a
right. Zinc, copper, hydrochlorite.
Zinc, copper, hydroxide with a high chloride content.
Yeah, and it's often found around magnesium deposits also.
Could it be acting like a piece of that material you said has the different drop rates?
That would be uncertain to know if this stuff contains odd nucleon spin isotopes. That we would have to look into.
Yeah.
Well, Nathan, do you still have that video that I sent you of my buddy? My buddy was just messing with it and recorded it. I actually got rid of the sample because, like, you'll have to just watch the episode, and I'm not going back into it. But I didn't have any of the sample left, and my friend was like, "I have a video of me messing with it," but it was only one piece, so you can't see the interpiece reaction, but you could see it bouncing and spinning and flipping itself over.
Just why did you get rid of it?
Because it had an adverse effect on, it just had an adverse effect in my household. Let's just put it that way. I'll tell you on the side, or you could watch the episode, but it had adverse effect.
I'm watching the Gerald laughing there because he knows what his experiments have in terms of adverse effects too, so he's laughing with you.
Oh, well, listen, it created some like issues with me, but then it also created like, because of like that, my girlfriend thought I was literally out of my mind. She thought I was, and I was like, no, trying to explain I wasn't. She still thinks I am, so I just said, you know what, it's better that this thing be gone, because whatever.
What did you experience? What did you experience?
Well, I mean,
just curious, like one or two things.
Yeah, I mean, I had metallic taste in my mouth. It screwed with my electronics really bad. Like, didn't know what time it was and not getting signals in the area. It was messing with the piece of titanium in my wrist, and cramping my entire arm up because, like, whatever effect it had, believe. Like, but I couldn't tell you where the piece of titanium in my wrist was until I started messing with the stuff, and I'm like looking at my hand, and I have a scar right above it. You know, so I'm like,
did it mess with your perception or with the, you know, your visual or audio? Biologically, not just with machines and things, but like on a. Did it mess with your mind?
No, it didn't mess with my mind, but it definitely like had a certain, like, I'm very sensitive to energy, so like this thing it was throwing something off, and it wasn't radioactive.
No, I think it was throwing off frequency that was literally affecting your consciousness.
Yeah, so I just, you know, like I said, I just had to let it go. I actually have a piece of material that came from the same locality that has some type of similar traits to it. But to be honest with you, it's not the same, and it doesn't act the same, but it's also a little unique. So I don't know what it is about this spot, but, you know.
Is it used parts of something? Like somebody else owned it?
It's not a part of anything. It's a natural material. It's a natural mineral.
I wonder what's underneath that space.
No, I'm saying like whatever the natural mineral, because you said you were making jewelry, so I assumed it was jewelry parts that you have taken, you know, or manufactured from new.
No, I was cutting the rock to, you know.
Okay, cutting a rock. Yeah. Okay. Now I apologize. I thought like you're making a whole structure. And I'm thinking metals.
It's a whole assumption.
Yeah.
So like this piece you'll see will actually shift. Where's the camera? This piece will actually shift a little bit, just being dropped on a piece of quartz. Like, I can't really show it too good, but the other video shows it so much better, like with the actual piece of material. But yeah, but this thing will actually spin itself like 180 degrees and stuff like that on occasion. I don't know. Like, this one's not, it's not the same thing, but this one's not normal either, though. So
I wonder what's underneath that natural space where you got that material.
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell because New York is basically a glacier rip. Yeah. You know, so it could really come from anywhere, and where it came from in New York was right off of the Hudson River, and the Hudson River was actually a lake during, you know, the post-melting of the glaciers, but all the mountains through there were all glaciated. So, you know, it's hard to, unless if you're pulling off of something off of like bedrock matrix or something like that, it's hard to tell where like erratics came from, and there's a lot of them. So it could be really from anywhere. I mean, that's how I found a huge sapphire on Long Island where we have no mineralogy, you know, because it got dragged there by a glacier, probably from like Vermont or Connecticut, you know. Yeah. That's how things go over here.
Thanks for that PDF, whoever posted it.
Putin? I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that material apparently has a Kagome lattice, which uses corner sharing triangles, which the Sierpinski gas is all about, triangles. So that lattice, I'm going to investigate that paper. Thanks.
All right, guys.
Weird.
It's almost 5 hours. I'm completely exhausted.
So am I. That's why you haven't been talking much.
Dude, I'm tired. I'm sorry, man. I get up at like 2 in the morning. So now.
See what happens when you put the three of us together and then add in Jeremiah? Man.
There's nowhere it doesn't go.
We can keep going for 5 hours.
And if you ask me, it's all the same.
Yeah.
That's what I'm a proponent of. It's all the same.
You know, I mean, everything's become this big information dump that gets poured on your heads, and it's like, okay, now I'm drowning, wiping your eyes, trying to get all this weird information out of your head.
Yeah.
Like, too much. Please, just, you guys stop. Get onto something.
Overload.
I just think, you know, these things go on longer, you know, like, let's just say if we lived in the same city, went to the same job, we would still be talking the same language. But just because I think we have the same interests, you know, time flies by, like, because it's topics, you know, that are enjoyed being discussed, you know, like if you talk to your neighbors about any of this, or, you know, like siblings, if they don't understand, or parents, or you just normal friends, will be like, I don't care. Like,
I've
I don't
gotten
care.
so many people
You
who
know?
look at me so many different ways.
It's something to remember. This book, which is probably one of the most incredible books ever written by Ben Popp, you know, so simple yet so to the point. Okay, he starts off this book by saying that this book is a culmination of discussions that occurred in his living room with friends. So, you know, if there was a garage with a refrigerator with beer, you know, we'd all be spending too much time there. But, you know.
Nathan's garage, yeah.
Oh, dude, I got a fridge right next to me, bro. Let me just tell you, you know, I'm getting close to pimping my garage out. I got another whole run to do of work. I just got to feel better to do it.
I hear you. It's been great. I appreciate the insight, Victor, Joe. Thanks for coming, Jeremiah. Ben, you're doing great with your experimentation. I love it. And Lulu, it's always great to hear your insights. So
thank you,
Jeremiah. Look into
Love
that.
to be here.
Connect with me at some point. Let me know what you find on that, because I'd be interested to know your take on it.
Nate's got my email if he can forward it to you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can check the private chat. If you've been here, I just posted my email in there at the beginning. You should have access to it. So. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah. I'll have Nathan send it over to me. I don't see it. I don't know. I'm stupid.
I'll post it again.
I'll make sure you get it. Don't worry about it.
Click on the private chat and then go ahead, and I just posted it again. If you joined a little late, there it is. You see it?
Comments.
Private
chat. Yep, got it. Yeah, that's easy enough, isn't it? All right, cool.
There you go.
Thanks.
Thank you, and I want to thank Sean, even though he's not here right now. He came in and did an awesome job on this.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
He's sending me one, so I'm going to verify all of it, man. It's going to be awesome. So he wants me to run it on my gold coil just to make sure we got the same thing going on. So gotta love that, man. All right, guys. Thank you very much for everybody being here. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you guys.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.